If anyone deserves the title Captain Canada, it's probably Mel Hurtig. He gave us the Canadian Encyclopedia, and for his entire career, he's been fighting the good fight against foreign takeovers, free trade, and what he views as the ongoing sellout of our country. At 75, he's still a crusader. His new book is called The Truth About Canada. You've been fighting for a particular kind of Canada, Canada that you believe in for your entire life. You've written a new book that basically is a catalog. You've got it all statistical on us, a catalog of everything that you see is going wrong with this country. Why did you write this book now?
I keep being so upset by our political leaders and our business leaders saying, oh, free trade is the whole basis of our economy, or if it wasn't for American investment, this country would crash completely. And they say things like that, and they never back it up with statistical information. Why did I write it? First thing in the morning, I usually, what an interesting guy I am. First thing in the morning, I go to Statistics Canada Daily on the internet, and they have this program Monday to Friday, which brings out really interesting information. And I read it, and I make notes, or print it out, and then the next day, I see how so often the press completely distorts what I read yesterday on the internet. And they do that because of their ideological position. We have the greatest concentration of ownership of the media, and particularly in the press, of any developed country in the world, and that's one of the biggest problems we have in this country.
I want to get to that because, I mean, you've raised foreign ownership, NAFTA, free trade, and media concentration, all of which the book deals with. But first, I think I also want to make it clear that this is, you're not just talking about either history or today. I mean, you're talking about a trend that has been going on here across a number of governments, Mulroney, Chrétien, Martin, and Harper in particular.
And two different parties, and
four
different prime ministers, and four different prime ministers bringing in policies that are very much to the detriment of the nation.
Well, and this is the basic theme, is that, you know, Canadians like to believe that we have a particular kind of Canada. There's a Canada that we know, that we value, that we're very, very proud of. And you're saying that isn't the Canada that is.
Yeah, I'm saying we're not the country that we think we are.
How so?
And we're not the country that other people around the world think we are. Jeffrey Sachs, the great economist, said, you know, where's Canada these days? Where's Canada on foreign aid? We're a disaster on foreign aid. We're supposed to be a compassionate country. Where's Canada on peacekeeping? I'll tell you where. We're 38th. We don't have a single officer in the United Nations peacekeeping headquarters in New York. There's 30 countries, as you know, in the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. And statistic after statistic, we're down at the bottom in terms of social planning. We're close to the top in how many children we have living in poverty. Well, there are some countries that have child poverty rates that are a third or a quarter of ours.
Well, let's start there, because, I mean, you wrote a book about poverty. This also has been a lifelong passion. One of the images we have is that we are a rich and prosperous country that's also generous. We've had 2 decades now almost of unprecedented growth. Yet the poverty rate over the last 20 years, at the time when people said we were going to eradicate childhood poverty, has not budged. Why?
20 years ago, we said we were going to eradicate child poverty by the year 2000. The poverty rate, while gross domestic product has more than doubled, increased by over $900 billion, the child poverty rate is exactly the same.
That doesn't make sense.
So, well, let's talk about that for a minute. Why doesn't it make sense? Where did the money go? The money, it certainly didn't go into social programs. We're 21st among the 30 OECD nations in social spending.
I think that would just surprise a lot of people. This is health, welfare, education, all the social things.
Well, the one mind-blowing stat in the book about education, you know, and I know, and everybody listening to this show knows that the world is becoming an increasingly competitive place. China, India, Indonesia, etc. And everybody, any economist will tell you we've got to increase our productivity. We've got to do more to help sustain our standard of living, never mind improve it, to sustain it. But we are a disaster in this will astonish almost everybody, in spending on education in Canada. All education at all levels, including post-secondary. We are now, let's see if I can remember the exact number, 57th in the world in terms of our spending on education as a percentage of gross domestic product. how can we be competitive? How can we be productive with numbers like that? I'll give you one more stat on education. In a recent 10-year period, we increased the number of young people at universities by 222,000 students, young men and women. We increased faculty by 2,000. So, what does that do to the quality of your education?
Just your classroom sizes get bigger and bigger
Huge.
and bigger.
And not only that, you get more and more young people who can't go to university because they can't get in, so they end up going to university at other places around the world.
I want to go back to poverty because you draw our attention to a fact, something we never think about, that outside of the United States, Canada is the only OECD country in the world that doesn't have a housing policy or a housing strategy.
Absolutely.
And that our record in public housing is also deplorable. Why is that important?
I'll turn you around and give you a question. What does that say about us? Where is the compassionate, caring, lovely, healthy country that we always thought we were and that we admired and other people have respected in the past? They don't anymore. They say, where's Canada on issues like housing? Where's Canada on climate change? Where's Canada on a whole bunch of important nuclear disarmament? We've changed a lot in profound ways. We're no longer the country we used to be. We're no longer the country that, and because of the press, we're no longer the country that most Canadians think we are. And that's the main purpose in this book, is to say, hey, wait a minute, here's what the truth is.
Now, you ask why we don't we don't do anything, or what that says.
Yeah.
But my guess is because probably most people don't think about it. And one of the reasons they don't think about it is that we're told, look, within the OECD, your record of economic growth is without peer. You have your fiscal management, your deficit is more in control than any of the other big G8 countries. How do you square that?
Your record of economic growth, how wonderful for all the people watching this show. If you take family wealth in Canada, the bottom 94% own about 4% of all family wealth in this country. Can you imagine that? One of the things that's happened, we have a greater disparity between the haves and the have-nots in Canada than at any time in the last 30 years. And Allan, every single year it's getting worse.
The Stats Can report over the last 25 years really showed that, eh?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I calculated that, hooray, the average family in Canada, they got the grand total of $2.12 a year for the last 25 years.
And it's not just a question of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. It's a middle class that is absolutely stagnating.
Absolutely. And the poor are getting poorer, but most people are middle class, and they have not made any substantial advance of any kind in the last quarter century.
Well, explain that in a little bit more detail again, because we know our GDP, our gross domestic product, the amount of stuff that we're making, has doubled in that period.
Absolutely. And so where's it going? It's going to tax havens in Bermuda and in the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands and the Channel Islands and in Ireland, etc. We've had 4 consecutive years in this country of all-time record corporate profits on a graph that goes up like this. All-time records. And what are the people doing with that money? Are they invested in research and development? Are you kidding? Our research and development, we're 27th of 30 countries in the OECD in R&D. Great. How are we going to be competitive? How are we going to be productive? They're sending the money out of the country, and they're sending it out to tax havens. Instead, our investment in new machinery and equipment is just terrible.
Well, let's take a step back, because within that whole, we're talking about the productivity debate here now. And I think everyone acknowledges Canada suffers a big productivity gap. I mean, it's almost $10,000 per capita compared to the United States, the amount of stuff we generate. Within the debate that was we hear, the part of the orthodoxy is Canada has its tax rates are too high. We've got to get the taxes down.
That's absolute
you
garbage.
Dispute that.
I hate that. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, the chapter on taxation. We're 27th in terms of corporate taxation now. Our corporate taxation now is way below the corporate taxation rates in the United States. I'll show you 2 interesting lines. Here is the line of corporate taxes in Canada. It goes like this. And here is the line of productivity in Canada compared to the United States, it goes like this at the same time.
So that basically, while we have been cutting taxes,
Yeah, the productivity has been dropping.
So for you, that's sufficient.
Well, that's because we're not investing enough in new machinery and equipment, etc.
The argument, obviously, is well, it's a competitive world out there, and that if our tax rates are not, at or below other countries, especially America, flight of capital will gravitate outside of Canada. You say nonsense to that as well.
Well, good God, it'll gravitate so much that last year we had by far the greatest inflow of foreign direct investment in our history. Here's a question I'm going to ask you to see how much you remember from the book. Since Brian Mulroney abolished the Foreign Investment Review Agency in 1985, there's been hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign direct investment monitored by Investment Canada. Now, we just heard Globe and Mail, we heard the Prime Minister say, foreign direct investment helps us create new jobs and new industry, etc. That's a standard line from the corporate elite in this country. In that 25 years, not quite 25, but in that long period of time with this hundreds of billions of dollars, what percentage of that hundreds of billions of dollars was for takeovers, and what percentage was for new business investment? You tell me.
I can't recall, but it's significantly more on takeovers than investments.
It's only 97% takeovers and 3% new business
Well, now
investment.
what happened to that? Because when NAFTA and the free trade before that was being negotiated, I mean, part of the promise was, what's going to happen now is because you have a common economic market in North America, is that capital is going to flow into Canada in order to access that U.S. market. But it's just saying that isn't happening.
Allan, I did something that for some reason nobody else has ever done. And it took me a long time. But it seems like a common sense thing to have done when you're talking about free trade and NAFTA. I sat down with the records from Statistics Canada and I recorded a whole bunch of things. The 17 years before the free trade agreement came into effect, which was 1989, and then I measured the 17 years after the free trade agreement came into effect. In every single economic important indicator, personal income, family income, wages, R&D, etc. And everyone, now this will boggle your mind, even in our share of the U.S. market, and even in our growth in exports on an annual basis, in every single one, we were better off before the free trade agreement than afterwards. Now, isn't that astonishing?
Yet the conventional wisdom, and I think in people's guts, they say since free trade, since 1988, things have gotten better.
Well, I think a lot of people feel that way, and I think there's no question that for a lot of the upper income people, they have gotten better. But you ask your average income person, a family with kids and mortgages to pay, they're struggling. They're struggling these days.
Let's just go back to foreign ownership, foreign takeovers. I mean, we did see in 2007, 2008 a flurry of big, especially resource-based companies. A lot of people say, well, that's just a function of globalization. The same is going all over the world. Is Canada unique in regard to the amount of foreign takeovers that have been occurring lately?
Allan, it's unique compared to any other major developed countries, by far. There are, last time I looked, 36 different sectors of the Canadian economy that are foreign-owned and foreign-controlled. In the United States, there are exactly that many.
That are controlled.
More majority foreign-owned and
yes.
controlled. Now, that would never be allowed to happen in France or in Germany or in Japan, for example. Do you think for a moment the Americans would allow the computer industry to be majority foreign-owned, the automobile industry to be majority foreign-owned and controlled, the rubber industry, the chemical industry, etc.? Of course they wouldn't. Of course they never. Now, but boy, people are saying, hey, look at what the Harper government did. They blocked the sale of Radarsat, and it's now going to continue to be under Canadian control.
This is the West Coast Aerospace Company that they blocked the takeover by an American firm.
So I say in my speeches these days, I say, hooray, what a wonderful development. That makes the score 10,827 to 1.
This is the first one they have turned down since the Foreign Investment Review
Exactly.
Agency. But the other side is we're also seeing record Canadian investment in the United States.
2 points I raise in the book that are really interesting, and nobody else has ever raised them. Record Canadian investment abroad.
Yes.
And that's true.
And you think that'd be a good thing?
Yeah, except there's something interesting. Point number 1, who's making that investment abroad? About 45% are good old, loyal, patriotic Canadian banks. Point number 2, Canadian investment abroad. Put the word Canadian in quotation marks. Nobody in Ottawa, not one single person in the Bank of Canada, in the Department of Finance, in Statistics Canada, in the Prime Minister's office, has the faintest idea of how much that so-called Canadian investment abroad is really Canadian, as opposed to big American companies coming into our loyal, patriotic Canadian banks, borrowing money, and
Through their branch plants, you think?
and borrowing money doesn't make any difference. They borrow it, and the key thing is that they then expense the interest payments against their profits in Canada, and they send the money offshore into tax havens so that they don't pay any taxes there either. So nobody knows how much of that is. One other thing, Allan, I tried for years now to get this number, and I can't get it. Nobody in Ottawa has the faintest idea how much of foreign direct investment in Canada is, in fact, money put up by our Canadian banks to help non-Canadian corporations take over Canadian companies. I wrote the president of the Royal Bank of Canada, and I said, you've been saying some certain things about foreign investment. When are you going to stop lending foreign companies money to take over Canadian companies? And he didn't reply to my letter.
Well, speaking of the president of the Royal Bank of Canada and Dominic de la Salle at Manulife, you're starting to hear, for the first time in my memory, corporate CEOs worrying about the hollowing out.
Yeah.
Of corporate Canada. I mean, is the situation? You've been talking about this since. I can remember Mel Watkins. The whole. This is an issue that I first heard about in the 1970s. Is it qualitatively and quantitatively different today than it has been in the past?
Very
in
much.
this country?
When we had the Committee for an Independent Canada, half our members were Tories and half were Liberals, and we had a huge number of Bay Street CEOs and corporate executives across the country on our side and donating money to help in our Not so now. I mean, the Dominic D'Alessandro, a wonderful man, they're rare. They're almost non-existent.
Oh, you think these voices, in fact, are more lonely today than they were
Very
in the
much
past?
more lonely, and the others are more strident and more looking for a fight. And the thing I hate is that they issue information that appears in our media, particularly our financial papers, that is absolute, forgive me for this, pure garbage. They issue numbers saying more companies are taken over by Canadian companies than vice versa. Not true.
Let's get into that
because
because clearly you've been wanting to get into this. The media. I mean, we tend to think that our media in Canada is pretty good, that the yardstick they use to cover the news is one of objectivity. You say, not only is there corporate concentration in this industry that's frightening, but there is a right-wing bias. Where do you see that?
Well, try our two national newspapers to begin with. Hey, the C.D. Howe Institute comes out with a report. The Fraser Institute comes out with a report. The Conference Board comes out with a report. Front page. If it's not on the front page of the paper, it's in the first couple of pages or on the front page of the business section. Some of the other organizations, which are always referred to as left-wing, they don't call the Conference Board right-wing or falling off the right edge of the globe as they should. They are referred to as left-wing, and their information is either not published or it's put in the back pages or it is published in distorted editorials in the Financial Post, etc.
Obama has said, Barack Obama has said, and we don't really know whether this is election rhetoric or whether it's substantive, but he has said that if elected, he wants to renegotiate NAFTA. I assume that you're rooting for him. What would you want to see?
I'd like to send a big donation.
What would you like to see renegotiated in NAFTA if it is opened up again?
I cannot possibly imagine any Canadian citizens that really care about our country signing the NAFTA agreement. You know, in a cold northern country, even though we're running out of natural gas and even though we're running out of conventional oil, we have to continue sharing our natural gas and our oil and other resources with the Americans on a pro rata basis to our current exports. 65% go to the Americans, whether we like it or not, whether we run short or not. Now, when that was in NAFTA, when the Mexicans heard the request by the Americans to do the same thing, the Mexicans said, "Are you kidding? We would never do something like that. What a stupid suggestion." We cannot sell our oil and our natural gas to Americans at a higher price than we charge Canadians. Supposing, for example, China or who knows what.
And we can't cut back on supply beyond current levels either.
Of course. But supposing China or whoever made it much better, doubled the price that we can get. Hey, we can't do that. We could do it, but we'd have to charge Canadians double the price too. No, that's the most stupid thing I've ever heard. The other thing, Allan, that you'll find a chapter in this book on is water. There's a chapter on water that totally contradicts conventional wisdom that our water isn't threatened under NAFTA. Our water is very much threatened. As sure as you and I are talking at this minute, the Americans are going to come in and say, look, because of NAFTA, I'm sorry, but you Canadians are going to have to share your water with us in the future.
Well, that boogeyman's been out there for a long time.
Yeah, but I've got substantiating information on that now.
Now, the other thing over the years, fun for me to watch, you become quite a student of public opinion and polling. And the other observation you have is that, look, if you look at what Canadians say in polls, and then you look at the output of governments, especially in the last 5 years, there's also a huge disconnect there. How is that sustainable?
I love doing an interview with somebody who's read the book. The interesting thing, Allan, is that if you look at the public opinion polls made of Canadian CEOs, and this is consistent all the time, and then if you look at the public opinion polls of the average Canadian, the vast majority of people, consistently, they're totally different.
Yeah,
the results.
tax cuts is a perfect example. It's always on the top of the CEO's list, always on the bottom of the public list.
Or social spending. They asked Canadian CEOs, where would you cut government spending? The top one item by far was cut social spending, even though we're one of the worst levels of social spending in the world. So there is this dichotomy between the average person and the CEOs. And the interesting thing is about this is that the CEOs always get their way with government.
And you talk about the disparity of what they think is important versus the population. You also write on the productivity. I mean, a lot of Canadians resist the whole productivity discussion because they say, everyone just wants me to work harder and sacrifice more. You outline what people in the field, among them Roger Martin and others, know is that Canadian business has a deplorable record in investment in machinery, technology, equipment, and research and development. Why is that?
That's a good question. I can't answer that question. It boggles my mind. Peter Newman says, in other countries, business wouldn't want to sell off their heritage for the future, wouldn't want to sell off everything they've tried to accomplish in all those years. They want to keep it for further generations because they're proud of their country. They want to keep it for their children and because they want to build this country. Strangely enough, in Canada, we've got a group of CEOs, and in all these organizations I mentioned, the C.D. Howe Institute, the Conference Board, the Fraser Institute, and the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, they all have one thing in common. They all get their money from the same place. And they have their own, quote, think tanks, end of quote, that produce all these documents, some of them are so much nonsense. It boggles my mind that we have a business class in this country that doesn't seem to care about our country.
You've been banging on this drum for a long, long time. I mean, you've been a tireless crusader in this fight of yours. Can the trends that you've talked about here that alarm you so much be reversed?
Yes, and that's the positive thing I mentioned in my chapter on democracy about what a wonderful thing this is that no longer does big business finance the political process. But there's one other thing that has to happen, Allan. Our electoral system is ridiculous. Our first past the post system has nothing to do with true democracy. We get situations like the Green Party getting 650,000 votes, electing nobody,
seats, yeah.
and the Bloc getting 650,000 votes and electing 21 members of parliament. That's ridiculous.
One time being leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the book is loaded with similar examples of where the will of the people in elections has nothing whatsoever to do with the the results of the election.
You say right at the start of the book is that you want people to read this book and be angry.
That's right.
What else do you want them to do?
I want a better Canada. I want a fairer, more egalitarian, more democratic country for my grandchildren and for the majority of Canadians. I love this country, and I've always loved it. And I think until recently, we've been very lucky to live in this country. Look at the natural resources we have. Look at the water we have. Look at the area that we have. But we've had lousy political leaders in recent years.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.